I'm Brian McCreath at GBH in Boston with Tianhui Ng, who is the music director of Victory Players. Tian, thanks so much for a little bit of your time in a really, really busy week to talk about Victory Players and especially El Puerto Rico, this amazing project. And I would like to ask you first, really what the nutshell is about how the spark got lit for El Puerto Rico. What was the initial impulse to even do this a number of years ago?
So, this project is about 4 or 5 years in the making, firstly. And it all started with the Massachusetts International Festival of the Arts, and Don Sanders is the executive artistic director there, and came to me and he said, we're restoring this golden age theater called the Victory Theater in the city of Holyoke. And I got to see the space. It's this, amazing space, no sightline issues, beautiful orchestra pit, great acoustic. And he said, well, now that we're almost there with the fundraising, we need an ensemble in residence. We need to kind of find a way to reconnect the theater and the arts to the community, to the city, and its kind of like, wider environment and region. And he said, what do you think would go well in here? And I looked around, here we are in Massachusetts. We have a wealth of symphony orchestras. We have a ton of choral societies. There's the Boston Early Music Festival. There is the Amherst Early Music Festival. There's a lot of everything. But in my area, there wasn't a contemporary music group. And I thought, how perfect, because here we are in the city of Holyoke, and there are lots of very, very salient issues that have to be discussed and to be thought of and to be investigated through music. And what better way to do that than through new music? The music that actually is not peripherally related to the city, but actually directly commenting on the issues of the city. So I thought about that, and I always start with looking at what the environment presents us, And here we have this wonderful, vibrant Puerto Rican community, and I looked around. There was no Puerto Rican music anywhere. And I talked, at least not on the other side of what we call the tofu curtain, on the other side of the Connecticut River. And here we are with the 5 colleges and yoga studios and organic farms. And there was no Puerto Rican music. It was very strange. And I also kind of wondered, so why is that, And then I started talking to the teachers in the area, the educators in the area, because I think anything that we want to do in the arts, probably, there is an element that kind of works with the youth in the area because they are the future. And it's very, very exciting to be able to engage with them directly. And they said to me, you know what, we have a ton of students of Hispanic Latino heritage, but it's very hard for us to find programming. And I thought, well, there is an authentic need, and we really need to engage with this. And so in looking at the history of Puerto Rico, and as the more I dug in, the more I found such a resonance with it. So I'm originally from Singapore, and unbeknownst to myself, I grew up with Tito Puente. And I in my 20s when I first graduated, everybody wanted to learn how to salsa, So I felt like I was surrounded by all this music, but not really understanding it and not really coming to grips with its roots and its heritage. So, and when I looked at it, I realized that Puerto Rico, in the context of the United States and its territories, is probably one of the oldest parts of the country. And when we talk about classical music, there's probably like 500 plus years of history to engage with. And how strange it was that here we are, that was 2015, I think, in Holyoke, and they say, we can't find material about this. 500 years later, we couldn't find material about it. We can do better. And so I looked at the name, and I felt El Puerto Rico, the name itself just tells you all about the riches, the heritage of the place, and that it was a great way to begin a reinvestigation of what even the term Puerto Rico means, because it's rich, and I felt it was so important for us to also start to kind of shift the public dialogue, because, I think public perception can be pretty rough. I remember taking an Uber ride, and as we were driving through the heart of town, somebody, and of course I can't remember who the driver was, said to me, well, they've done horrible things to the city. Now there are all these bright colors, and we really don't like that. I was like, well, that's a real cultural disconnect there, And meanwhile, there were restaurants that were undiscovered because, and I've come to really, really love Puerto Rican food. I think it's an essential part of getting to know the music is to get to know the food, and I'm very excited about that. And hence the project, Yeah. And I think, when I was thinking about this too, so there was the question, should I just audition musicians from the area? And I thought to myself, well, that wouldn't necessarily do justice to what this project is trying to do, because I think, I am personally very inspired by the work of Simon Rattle. And I went and did my undergraduate in Birmingham, in the UK, in part because he was music director at the CBSO. And of course was, that kind of fanboy reading his biography going, so how did he help to turn around the city of Birmingham with music, with the symphony orchestra and with the arts? And he was thinking, well, we need to be absolutely world class. We need to have the best of the best, and we need to represent. We need to represent all this wonderful culture and this wonderful music here in Holyoke. And my dream is that, people hear this music and they go, Holyoke? I've never heard of Holyoke, but now I want to know more about it. And perhaps they might come and they might watch us in one of our concerts, and that would be amazing.
Well, and even those who have heard of Holyoke maybe don't know how prominent the Puerto Rican population is there.
Right.
It's one of the largest per capita Puerto Rican populations in the United States.
Right.
So your perception of the need for more expression of the Puerto Rican culture, it seems entirely appropriate, especially through new music, which wouldn't be the first thing people might think of when you say expression of Puerto Rican culture.
Yes. Yes.
So your project began as this idea to bring conversation, to bring voice to that culture, to bring a community around this theater, the Victory Theater, named, as I discovered, for the victory in 1918 of World War I. That's sort of the history of that name. But it had to take a next step into something practical, and so you decided to commission composers, largely Puerto Rican composers, but not entirely Puerto Rican composers. Tell me your thinking behind who would be commissioned to write new music for this now resident ensemble.
I think, it begins from a place of humility, which is, here I am, a Western classical musician, originally from Singapore, freshly transplanted to Western Massachusetts, and I've been given this creative challenge to come up with something that is authentic to the area, that engages with its community and kind of like raises the imagination of everyone around. And I thought, like with many things, the first thing I have to do is to meet a need. And there was a need for these stories to be told. There was a need for this community to kind of talk to each other and for us all to know that we're neighbors. And actually, we're quite nice, actually. We're all very human and we share a lot in common. But then also realizing that, that is not my story necessarily. And for it to be authentic, I had to reach out to the community. So I started thinking it has to begin with commissioning people who are already interested in the subject, or they are from Puerto Rico and they have something that they haven't been given the opportunity to say something about, and therefore it kind of came very naturally that it would be Puerto Rican voices, Puerto Rican stories, or things inspired by Puerto Rico. But I was also very conscious. It's just that talking to a lot of my colleagues. Like, okay, so now I'm a Puerto Rican composer. Does that mean that I have to write a salsa? I feel like that kind of to borrow from Gabriel Bush's words, something that's so on the nose, right? So obvious, and then something that is so kind of dealing with the folk music and also kind of in a sense ghettoizing this music. I think that wasn't necessary. That was something I was absolutely determined to avoid, and so I thought it was very healthy for us to represent the diversity of these voices. So there are composers who are still based in Puerto Rico. There are composers who, for various reasons, started their journey in Puerto Rico and now are all over the world. So we have composers from Valencia, from Illinois, from all over. And then we have composers who have maybe, because of this project or because of a long-standing fascination in Puerto Rico, want to write. And so we made a general call for compositions, and people wrote proposals. And I looked at both their music, their musical voice, and how it might complement each other to form a cohesive program.
And so the commissions were really curated. It wasn't sort of just an open call and you took what you got. It was really, you chose the composers and the particular variety of voices that you would be incorporating into the project.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I will take responsibility for that.
Well, and it succeeds too, because hearing the variety of pieces, the variety of voices, the variety of techniques, the variety of themes, even the variety of inspirations, it is so multifaceted that there is clearly no way to sort of say Puerto Rican new music and mean it and have it mean a particular thing. It's so many things through these composers. And you set it up as a residency.
That's right.
So that everybody would come together. The ensemble, the composers would come together with you for these concentrated periods of time. And I'm so interested in the community that develops during those concentrated times. I mean, the community extends then remotely when everybody is off in their own world, doing their thing, I'm sure. But it's those moments when everybody is together, especially in the last year and a half, something that couldn't happen until now. And describe to me what the energy has been like among the group of musicians and composers. How do you even begin to encompass the sort of creative energy that develops when they're all together?
Well, I think I will begin by speaking first about what I was thinking about when I created that structure, even like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
You know, and I was thinking about the kind of invisible glass ceilings that different diverse populations face all the time, and what is the opportunity for a composer wanting to tell the story to have the opportunity to even talk about the subject, to have the freedom to say whatever they want in a way, you know, and then to have it delivered by these, you know, and come, you know, brought to life by these fabulous musicians. And one of the big things is that I think about how, you know, that at that point in time, why is it that we didn't see more prominent, you know, Puerto Rican musicians on the national or international stage, you know? So what was holding people back? Because, you know, as people hear in this collection of music, that this extraordinary music making, this extraordinary musical culture, this extraordinary musical minds and intellects in here. It's so exciting. Mm-hmm. And so then the question is like, well, if they're so awesome, why is it that nobody knows them? And I think about the structures of commissions. You know, I think, you know, people get the chance to write a 5 to 6 minute piece. Do they get the chance to write an 8 to 12 minute piece where it expands? Do they get the chance to then write a 28 and then like a full scale 60 minute? You know, there is a certain kind of scale in all of this, right? That results in institutions beyond institution like ours, you know, acknowledging the wonderful work that they do, and sometimes some of it is timing too. So, you know, I made it such that there was no limit on the age. You know, you could apply as young as you like, you know, and you could apply and write to us if you are no longer a young composer, because that's also a very problematic term, you know, and depending, especially when I think about the kind of opportunities that people have. Sometimes, you know, people take more time because they have less resources. And so that whole young composer thing kind of rules out a lot of fantastic musicians. So there was a lot there that was about creating opportunity and creating space in a situation where I actually didn't know any of them. You know, because I made this call, and it was almost like an act of faith, you know, that if we respond to what the community needs, that something will happen, and something really exciting. And I think, you know, so you said, you know, like, talk about what it was like. I think if you can imagine, I always say to these people, you know, to people about this, it's almost slightly ridiculous, isn't it? Like, you know, so you get a phone call from a new music ensemble from Western Mass, and it's a Singaporean person calling, and they say, I want to talk about Puerto Rico, you know, and they're speaking English and not Spanish, and you're like, you know, is this guy for real? And, you know, and is the music going to be any good, you know? So I think there was a lot there. So I think there was, but at the same time, I think a lot of people recognize just how unique an opportunity this was. And I think, you know, I would like to say that there was also a purity of spirit here. You know, like we just really, like, wanted to do this, no other agenda. Let's just make amazing music happen. Let's make this happen for all these amazing people. And so I think there was about like a split second of doubt when people arrived. And then there was this moment where it was like, wow, these guys are serious. The music's amazing. The musicians are amazing. Let's talk. You know, and that's when the magic started happening. And I feel like that's been the case. And that's also one of the things that is for me such a wonderful thing to see, that there is this community. And just yesterday, talking to the players, talking about the sense of almost like being in some kind of family together, you know. And the pandemic has, of course, made it very kind of striking how important that was to us, to be able to sit together and eat dinner together, and to talk after the whole day has ended over a beer, just last week I was talking to Armando Baiolo, and he was just saying, it's not since college that I've had a beer at 1 a.m. in the morning and I'm talking about the meaning of life. And I think, that kind of space and that kind of exploration needs to happen. And I think it's a really special thing that we got to build this kind of relationship between the composers and the performers, between myself and the organization. And pre-COVID, it also meant that the community got to see this in action.
Yeah.
And I still remember we used to perform at El Mercado, which is this space that was created by Nueva Esperanza, New Hope, in Holyoke, a nonprofit. And it is in the heart of the Puerto Rican community. Mm-hmm. And there were, and it's both very touching and also just like slightly sad, that like people came and they saw like, wow, these are a bunch of classical musicians here. Am I allowed in? And then, we'd hold the door open, invite them in, and have a conversation with them. And, like, fast forward 3 to 4 years, now some of them have heard about it from their kids because we went to the schools and met them in the schools, And I think here begins this conversation. And we were also very conscious about, in a sense, demystifying the composer. Mm-hmm. There is this kind of 19th century composer as God on a pedestal kind of thing. And here we are in a cafe-like setting, and the composers, you realize the person you were just having a drink with is a composer, and he stands up and now he tells you about his piece and his personal story and how it connects, and it just really makes it real. And I think the audience numbers are gradually growing because, it's also the stories that they're trying to tell, and it's the personalities that inform our understanding of the music that makes it so exciting, and it really comes to life, because it even with the professed spirit of each piece, maybe whether it's a political statement or something very nostalgic or something very personal, there is this whole personal story behind it that just gives it all so much more meaning and makes so much more approachable. And I find that really special.
Well, I mean, the collection of composers, as you're describing them, and they are of so many age ranges. I think that's part of what makes this very temporary community so interesting, is that you have these various perspectives of not just where they are in the world, but where they are in time. You might put it that way. I guess one final question is just for you creatively. You already lead a career that's eclectic. I mean, I maybe that's not the right term for it, but you are known for exploration in music and for not necessarily only kind of pursuing one track. So I guess what I'm curious about is just the moments for you personally that have been the most rewarding in this process, the moments that have been the crystallization of, yes, this is what I wanted this to be, or this went beyond. Can you even describe maybe one of those moments that you might have had in rehearsal, or even as you were performing here in the studio, or even in a conversation? What was one of those moments that was, this is what I wanted to do, and it happened?
I think it, luckily for us, happened fairly early on. It was the first concert in El Mercado, which is this small little, if you can imagine, almost like a small cafe-like, bar-like space that everybody has a little bit of alcohol on the table, and we're playing, and it's very casual. And we played Caprichos by Roberto Sierra. And that was, I think as a music director, it was also my job to kind of test drive the wonderful new ensemble that I had put together, hypothetically, right? And here we have 5 movements that were each of them so different in character and almost like kind of exquisite little delights, caprices. And instead of performing them all in one go, we talked a little bit about how each movement was special. And almost like, the flavor of each one. And I remember we finished one of these movements, and I heard this collective, oh my God, and that was like, yes, we're doing the right thing here, and my Puerto Rican colleagues say con sabor, with flavor, and that's totally what it was, I think that moment of like getting it, and I feel also, that this was also a project of kind of intercultural understanding, because there were so many aspects of performance that cannot be captured in a score. And there is a whole performance practice behind this, and it behooves the performer to kind of like understand where this music is coming from. And one of the things that we get trained to do, kind of impeccably in music conservatories, we come out and we can perform the most difficult things with incredible precision, but then sometimes we're asked to improvise and we freeze. And it's the one thing that I've seen, and especially with this music, a large part of that of this heritage is actually in the popular art and in the folk music, which has such a great amount of improvisation to it. So we started with improvisation explorations with jazz musicians, with Latin jazz musicians, in order that we understood the feeling of the beat, so that we could say, actually this is more forward, or this needs to be kind of more laid back, and this is like a little bit behind the beat, and you just need that kind of like a little kind of a twist there, and then you get it. And like during this process for this recording process, it was like talking to each of the composers, getting the feeling of the sika, the yuba, and just getting an understanding between the drummers and us, just between the musicians, how the thing is interlocked together. And it was so exciting, It was also just so real, because it was like, this is the stuff that there's not a performance treatise out there about this, right? And so you have to talk to the composers, you have to talk to the professionals and the masters of this style, learn from them, work with them in order to do this. And I just remember this delight on Brenda Lee Cepeda's face. I've been hanging out in her house with her kids, and we've been talking about this, and I'm learning about all the dance moves.
Because she's the bamba dancer,
She's the
from this
bamba
legendary family of bamba dancers. Yeah.
Exactly. And that moment when she said to me, well, that's my uncle, in that video on Sesame Street, I was just like, oh my God, this is like living the dream of like really having musics and cultures talk to each other, coming together to create something that really respects that tradition, and is at the same time something so new and says something that people are curious to hear about. I think that's been really, really special.
Yeah. Tian, thank you for this time, but thank you as well for these years of El Puerto Rico and for the Victory Players. It's an amazing amount of effort that you've put in, but I think you're right that when you describe these rewards for everybody involved, it's extraordinary. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.